Picture 6 men. Now picture 30 closing in on them from every direction at once, front, flanks, rear, no gap to slip through. It's the 11th of May, 1969, somewhere northeast of Quan Loi Base Camp, and an American reconnaissance team has just run out of options. The gunships that were supposed to save them, driven off by the rain. The radio, fading with every word. Reinforcements, not coming. So here's the question I want you to sit with before this story even starts, and drop your honest answer in the comments. If you were the man in charge that night, would you call artillery down onto your own position to survive? Because that's exactly what the team leader did. By morning, he'd walked those shells to within 25 meters of his own men, laid a dawn ambush, and crawled out alone to take 2 enemy positions apart with grenades. All 6 Americans walked out of that jungle. Let me tell you how. Those 6 belonged to the long-range reconnaissance patrols, the small teams that, across roughly 23,000 patrols in Vietnam, reported something almost hard to believe: 400 enemy killed for every American lost. Think about that ratio for a second. The North Vietnamese had a standard playbook for a team they'd spotted: surround it, swarm it, finish it before a single helicopter could arrive overhead. On this particular night, the weather did half their work for them. Half. As Crabtree's men were about to learn, half was not nearly enough. Here's the problem the United States never solved in Vietnam. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of the South was raw wilderness, triple-canopy jungle so thick the sun barely reached the floor, mountain border zones, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail winding through the Central Highlands like the root system of some enormous tree nobody could ever dig out. Send a battalion crashing through that, and the enemy heard you coming from miles off. They listened to your radios, they counted your helicopters, and then, calmly, they decided whether tonight was a good night to fight you. Imagine playing a game where your opponent always moves second and always sees your hand first. That was the war. That was the whole maddening shape of it. An enemy who was everywhere and nowhere, visible exactly when he chose to be. What it demanded were eyes in the places no big unit could reach: trail junctions buried deep in hostile country, base camp perimeters hugging the Cambodian border, ridge lines no American boot had touched in months. It demanded men willing to walk into all that in groups of 6, carrying nothing but the faith that someone would come pull them out when it went wrong. And I have to be honest with you here, sometimes nobody came. The 1st of June, 1967, Sergeant Steve Bonnert led a 4-man team, 2nd Brigade LRP, 4th Infantry Division, into the Ia Drang Valley near Highway 19 to check the damage from a B-57 strike. The enemy was already waiting. Within minutes, the team was compromised, and they could hear it, movement tightening through the brush on every side, the circle drawing closed. Bonnert got on the radio and asked for extraction. The battalion commander, sitting miles away, looked at his map, called the area cold, and said no. For 5 hours, 4 men lay frozen in the undergrowth, listening to the North Vietnamese calmly dig fighting positions all around them. When a relief column finally clawed its way toward them, it got ambushed on the way in. A young soldier named Dan Harmon and a loot from Woody Island, Alaska, caught AK-47 fire dragging the wounded Bonnert into cover. Harmon died on that trail. Bonnert held on for 12 more days before he died too. I'll let you decide what you think of the man who called that valley cold from miles away. I have my own opinion, and I suspect you've already got yours. That was 1967, and those men were making the doctrine up as they bled for it. By February 1969, everything changed. Every long-range patrol unit in the country got folded under a single banner, the 75th Infantry, Ranger. The teams were still 6 men, the jungle was still the jungle, but now the methods had hardened into something the North Vietnamese hadn't planned for. The thread goes back further than that. December 1965, the 101st Airborne stands up the first LRP platoon in Vietnam. By the middle of 1966, General Westmoreland has authorized long-range patrol elements in every division in the country. Then, on the 1st of February 1969, the whole patchwork gets reflagged into lettered companies of the 75th Infantry Regiment, Ranger. 13 companies, each one tied to a parent division, and inside each the team. 6 men, a team leader, an assistant team leader, a radio operator, and remember that job because the enemy made them their #1 target every single time. A point man, a slack man, rear security, small enough to disappear into the trees, lethal enough to ruin anybody who found them. They carried CAR-15 carbines and sawed-off 12-gauge shotguns stuffed with double-aught buck. Because at 15 meters in Triple-Canopy, a shotgun settles an argument a rifle is still trying to have. Every team hauled M18A1 Claymore mines, 700 steel balls waiting to fly outward along the perimeter. When a position was compromised, the Claymore got the first word, and every man on that team understood one thing in his bones. The ANPRC-25 radio was the only thread connecting them to artillery, to gunships, to any hope of extraction. Lose it, and a surrounded team was already a dead one. Getting in was its own piece of theater. A Huey Slick would fake touchdowns across 3 or 4 clearings in a row, so the watching enemy never knew which one actually held the team. Clever, isn't it? Once they were down, 6 men curled into a wagon wheel perimeter and lay dog, dead still, breathing slow, just listening. And here's the part that messes with your head. A 1969 study in the U.S. Naval Institute's proceedings ran the numbers and found that a soldier's odds of surviving were roughly twice as good as they were inside a full battalion, and that each of those 6 men inflicted somewhere around 6 times the enemy casualties. 6 men safer and deadlier than hundreds. Does that make sense to you on first hearing? It didn't to a lot of generals either. But it was real, and the 22nd of February 1969 proved it. Specialist 4 Robert Law and 5 teammates from Company I, 75th Rangers, 1st Infantry Division, set a Claymore kill zone over a streambed trail in Ting Phuc Ton Province. 3 Viet Cong wandered into it. The team dropped 2 with rifle fire and triggered a Claymore onto the 3rd, a machine gunner, at point-blank range. In the fight that erupted, team leader Danny Wiggins started calling artillery in danger close. Then an enemy grenade dropped right into the middle of them. Robert Law threw his own body on top of it. 5 men walked out of that jungle because 1 man chose not to. He was awarded the Medal of Honor. And just like that, Company I had buried one of its own with the nation's highest decoration. What none of them knew was that 3 months later, another Company I team leader would be handed the very same brutal arithmetic. 6 men, enemy on every side, and no way out but straight through it. This time, the math came out differently. The evening of the 11th of May, 1969, Sergeant Orman Crabtree's 6-man team, Company I, 75th Rangers, 1st Infantry Division, was working the ground northeast of Quan Loi Base Camp in Binh Long Province when roughly 30 enemy soldiers came moving through the trees, not from one direction, from all of them. The light was dying, a thin drizzle was starting to fall, and the radio was weak, barely scratching its way to the relay. This was the exact nightmare every LRRP rehearsed in his head and prayed he'd never live. Compromised, outnumbered 5-1, the jungle quietly shrinking around 6 men who had nowhere left to run. So Crabtree did the only thing left to do. He got on the radio and called the artillery in. The first rounds slammed down at 50 meters, close enough to feel the shock of them in his teeth, and still not close enough. The enemy kept coming, so he adjusted, 25 meters. At that range, the only thing standing between saving his team and killing it himself was a single correct 8-digit grid coordinate. Transpose one number, just one, and the next salvo lands directly on top of them. Then the drizzle turned into a downpour. The gunships tried to come help, and the rain shoved them right back out of the sky. Now the team was truly alone. 6 men in a perimeter smaller than your living room, high explosive hammering the earth on every side, the radio handset drowning in static and rain, and 30 North Vietnamese soldiers moving somewhere out there in the black gaps between the shells. They held. All night long they held, and when the first gray light finally crept into the trees, Crabtree lifted his head and counted 10 enemy soldiers closing in on their position. So Crabtree set the ambush himself, picked the ground, set the trigger, waited. And when those 10 enemy soldiers walked into it, the opening blast dropped 4 of them at once. His 6 survivors opened up. Crabtree led a flanking move, and then he did the thing that separates a story you've heard before from one you haven't. He broke off from his own men and crawled forward alone, just him, into it. He reached the first enemy position and tore it apart with grenades. Then a machine gun bunker opened up from a second position. And what do you do there? Most men take cover and pray. Crabtree crawled toward the gun, elbows and knees dragging through the mud, muzzle flash spitting at him from 40 feet away in that gray morning light. He got close enough to put grenades straight through the aperture. The bunker went quiet, and all 6 men walked out. Let that settle for a moment. The same company that lowered Robert Law into the ground in February brought every single man home in May. Not because May was an easier night. If anything, it was worse. They walked out because one team leader flatly refused to let the dark, the rain, and 30 enemy soldiers write the ending for him. Sergeant Crabtree received the Distinguished Service Cross. Headquarters U.S. Army Vietnam, General Orders No. 4343, dated the 6th of December 1969. In 1996, he was inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame. And I want to be precise about something, because it matters. What he did was not recklessness. It was doctrine, pushed all the way to its outer edge. A surrounded LRP team carried one asset the enemy never properly accounted for. A team leader trained to bring high explosive within 25 meters of his own people and keep walking it closer until the enemy either broke or died. Read his actions back, and you'll see the whole philosophy in miniature. Crabtree didn't call artillery to hold the North Vietnamese at arm's length. He called it to kill them. When the survivors regrouped at dawn, he ambushed them. And when the ambush left the job half-finished, he crawled forward and finished it with his own 2 hands. That's not a man surviving a trap. That's a man turning the trap around. And here's something worth sitting with. Crabtree's team wasn't putting up numbers like that alone in 1969. Take July at Landing Zone Baldy. An 11-man ranger camp from G Company 75th Infantry Americal Division took a company-sized North Vietnamese sapper assault square in the face. You know what gave them their first warning? The camp's pet dog. A scruffy mutt named Crash sensed it and alerted before the sappers even reached the wire. 11 rangers and 1 dog held through the entire night. By dawn, 31 enemy bodies lay inside the perimeter, part of a wider fight that left somewhere around 43 of the enemy dead. The camp held, and down in the Central Highlands, a single team from the 4th Infantry Division climbed onto a hilltop on the Chu Pong Ridge near Pleiku and spent 3 full days calling artillery and Air Force fighter bombers down onto a large enemy concentration below them. When an estimated company finally stormed up at them, those men fought for 3 straight hours. They were pulled off a hilltop that was, by that point, literally on fire. Stop and picture the scale of it. 6 men acting as a fire control node, summoning the entire technological weight of the American military from a patch of ground smaller than a tennis court. And here's the thing, the North Vietnamese were not slow learners. They adapted. By 1967, they'd fielded dedicated counter-reconnaissance teams with tracking dogs posted along the trail, callable to a fresh footprint within 24 hours. They put cash bounties on LRP teams, somewhere between $1,000 and $2,500, in a country where a laborer earned around 85 cents a day. Do that math for a second. A single American patrol was worth years of wages. And their standard answer to a compromised team never really changed: the dog pile. Rush enough men forward to pin and swamp those 6 Americans before air power could ever get there. After the war, North Vietnamese veterans reportedly called the Rangers the deadliest American unit they faced, for one simple, infuriating reason: they kept turning up exactly where they weren't supposed to be. The Australian SAS, running near-identical patrols out of Phuoc Tuy province, earned a name that's somehow even better: Ma Rung, the Phantoms of the Jungle. But, and I won't pretend otherwise, this doctrine had a failure mode, and when it failed all the way. The 17th of November, 1969. Sergeant Craig Jorgensen's 5-man H Company team, 75th Rangers, 1st Cavalry Division, got hit. 2 men killed instantly, a third badly wounded, and then Jorgensen was told the words no team ever wanted to hear: no quick reaction force available. So he and his team leader fought back-to-back, standing over the bodies of their own dead, until rescue finally came. 500 LRP soldiers were killed in Vietnam. Company I, Crabtree's company, Law's company, buried 29 of them by itself. Sit with that number against everything you just heard. In 1974, the colors of the 75th Infantry passed to the newly formed 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalions, the seed of today's 75th Ranger Regiment. Staff Sergeant Robert Pruden, the G Company team leader who threw his own body over his men at Quang Ngai on the 29th of November 1969, was inducted into the Ranger Hall of Fame's very first class. The regiment still runs an annual competition in his name, the Pruden, so that the men who come after never get to forget him. And that was the whole proposition. It was never abstract. 6 men with a radio, moving through the dark, could be more lethal and more survivable than an entire battalion, but only if every single link in the chain held. The artillery had to be accurate, the radio had to carry, and the man calling the fire had to trust the math more than he trusted his own fear. 25 meters, that was the margin between living and dying out there. For these men, it was always the margin. So now I'll hand it to you. Crabtree crawled toward a machine gun when every instinct on Earth screamed at him to crawl the other way. What do you think makes a man do that? Training? Something he was just born with? Or something the rest of us will never quite understand from the safe side of a screen? I genuinely want to know where you land on that, so tell me in the comments. And if these are the stories you want more of, the 6-man teams, the impossible nights, the names that almost got lost, say so, and I'll keep finding them.